Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. 5 seconds to focus your attention. A quiet Utah home, interior lights low, people asleep. A single gunshot breaks the room-to-room silence. A teenager appears on the stairs, says one word, robbery, and goes. In towns like Ogden, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The facts would line up quickly. Maybe a little too quickly. This case begins on October 18, 2025, in Ogden, Weber County, just before 3 a.m. Responding units enter a residence and move with the standard sequence: secure, clear, preserve. No foot chase outside. No second scene. One address, one interior path. The target of their work is a bedroom off a hallway where a 15-year-old girl, Chanel Alvarez, is located with an apparent gunshot wound to the head. Emergency medical personnel confirm there is nothing to reverse. The second layer is human. A household witness awakened by the shot reports encountering a teen male on the stairs. The witness recalls the one-word claim, robbery, followed by exit behavior. That is not a conclusion, it is only a statement to compare with what the room is saying. In any nighttime bedroom shooting, investigators test the robbery claim against the scene signature: forced entry or not, scatter or not, missing items or not. What the room offers is incomplete but pointed. The home's own firearm is reported missing. That detail is logged because it reframes the claim. A robbery that leaves jewelry or electronics untouched but removes only the household gun raises questions that procedure is designed to answer. The third layer is control of time. The working clock starts just before 3 a.m. The chain of custody begins inside the house and does not leave the house except with properly sealed evidence. Officers maintain a single perimeter, a single log. The stairwell is photographed as carefully as the bed frame. If the word robbery is true, the rest of the house should show it. If it is not, the room will, too. You won't hear opinion here. You'll hear what is on paper: the location, the time, the observable condition of the scene, the report that a teen male was present and left, the notice that the family's gun is missing, the medical confirmation that Chanel did not survive. From this point forward, the case lives on the measurable and the verifiable. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. The work after the pronouncement is mechanical on purpose. Technicians take the room back to its first principles: light, angles, measurement. A fixed lens sweep documents the bedroom, the doorway, and the short run of stairway outside. Scales go down, distances are recorded, and a simple rule governs the next hour: touch nothing until it's photographed, photograph nothing until the scene log says who is in the frame and why. The point isn't drama, it's repeatability. A single objective for this phase is weapon attribution. The family reports that a handgun kept in the home is missing. Ownership records and prior documentation supply a make, model, and serial. That information is compared against injury characteristics and any itemized cartridge or packaging that should match that platform if it were present. The case file language is careful but direct. The missing household firearm is identified as the murder weapon. Even without recovery, the identification is noted so the search teams and detectives know what they're looking for outside the house and what questions to ask inside it. The second objective is passage mapping. The hallway and the stairwell aren't just architecture, they are the only reported route used by the departing team. Technicians photograph the tread faces, the banister, and the landing. This isn't about guessing who touched what. It's about fixing the path in time so later statements can be measured against a diagram, not a memory. A robbery claim lives or dies on the path. Where a person moved, how fast, and what they would have seen as they passed the bedroom threshold are all testable once the geometry is locked. Dispatch records and the first officer's body-worn notes anchor the time window. A single shot reported just before 3 a.m., officers on scene within minutes, emergency personnel following. That window matters because it fences in the interval between the shot and the exit down the stairs. When a timeline is short, it grows less friendly to stories that require side trips. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. In the bedroom, the practical checks continue. Bedding and furniture positions are sketched relative to the door. The path between the door jamb and the bed's edge is measured. The ceiling and adjacent wall are examined for any mark that would support trajectory work later. No speculation is written into the log. Only what is observable gets a line. Chanel Alvarez's name is recorded on every relevant page because the system requires her to be more than a pronoun. The stairwell is photographed with the same control as the bedroom because it's the bridge between a gunshot and a story. The household witness has already reported what they heard and saw, a teenage male holding a gun on the stairs, using the word robbery, then leaving. That account goes into a separate statements packet, but scene notes are built to test it without bias. When investigators later compare the stairwell photos to that account, they will be looking for basic alignment. Could the teen have been where the witness says? And could the witness have seen what they described from their location and height at that hour and lighting? A parallel task runs outside the forensics tape, inventory reconciliation. Families don't always know exactly what is in a room at 3 in the morning, so detectives ask simple, structured questions. What should be here? What is definitely gone? Who had access to the missing firearm before tonight, and when was it last seen secured? The answers are written as stated by lines, not conclusions. If a later search finds the weapon elsewhere, those lines still stand. What remains constant through this phase is restraint. There is no statement about motive. There is no leap about the word robbery. There is only a room documented to standard, a stairwell fixed in photographs, a time window bounded by records, and a missing household gun identified in the file as the weapon that ended a 15-year-old's life. In towns like this, clarity is its own kind of respect, for the victim, for the family, and for the court that will read every page. For a brief human note, Chanel deserves one. She was a daughter and a student. Her name will be repeated by people who loved her, but in this room it appears in print next to line numbers and evidence tags. The process can feel cold. That cold is by design. It keeps the work honest when everything around it is raw. To understand what happened in one room, investigators stepped outside the room only far enough to map the people who lived around it. They built 2 files side by side, who Chanel Alvarez was in daily life, and how a teenage male came to be in her home at that hour. Victimology is not biography for its own sake. It supplies context the scene can't provide, routine, access, and risk. Friends and adults around Chanel describe a 15-year-old with plans and a steady rhythm: school, family, church. Detectives note those anchors because the absence of chaos in a routine makes deviations stand out on a clock. When a life follows a pattern, the hours before 3 a.m. are easier to examine. The goal is simple: learn what normal meant for her so anything that doesn't fit can be flagged without guesswork. The parallel file concerns the teenage male referenced in witness statements and in the charging documents after the arrest. Records and interviews established that he and Chanel were in a dating relationship and that he often stayed at her residence. Utah law treats that status as cohabitant for domestic violence purposes. That single word shapes the legal lane of this case. It doesn't prove an act, it defines how the act, if proven, will be charged and tried. In a domestic violence homicide, the state is allowed to articulate the relationship as part of the offense, not to inflame, but to specify the context of harm. Why this matters for the investigation: cohabitation changes access. A person who routinely stays in a home knows the layout, the habits, and the boundaries. They often know where valuables are kept and where a firearm is stored. They don't need to force an entry to get inside or to move through hallways without making noise. Those facts are neutral until the evidence pushes them in a direction. Investigators therefore log cohabitation evidence in the same folder as scene measurements. It belongs there. Detectives then reduce the hours before the shot to a workable list of confirmations. They verify who was in the residence that night, who went to sleep where, and who had reason to be awake. The purpose is not to script a story, it is to fence what can be said with foundation. Interviews are taken in clean blocks, with times and locations recorded, because memory becomes evidence only when it is tied to a clock. A teenager's word to a friend, a parent's observation, and a neighbor's routine, each gets its own line. Nothing is blended. The missing firearm report from the family sits at the intersection of both files. In a home where a teen boyfriend often stayed, a household handgun that cannot be located after a close-range shooting carries weight. Detectives do not write speculation into the record. They write the necessary questions. Who last handled the gun? Who knew the storage spot? Was it seen secured the prior day? Those questions are procedural, not accusatory. They are asked the same way in every case where a weapon from inside the home is tied to a death inside the home. The medical examiner's early notations remain narrow, a head wound consistent with close-range discharge, pending full report. That narrowness is important. It prevents the file from outrunning the science. The investigative team's task in this chapter is not to extract meaning from bloodstained math or to stage a reconstruction. Their task is to align people to time and to place, and to document a legally significant relationship that explains why this homicide carries a domestic violence designation in Utah. There is space here for a human line, and it belongs to Chanel. Families who lose a child in a domestic context often talk about warning signs in hindsight. Investigators can't build a case on hindsight, but communities can build prevention around it. Teen dating violence escalates quickly when access is constant and boundaries are unclear. The case file won't preach. It will record, and that record is its own warning. As of October 26, 2025, the public posture of the prosecution is straightforward. The teenage male named in filings is charged as an adult with first-degree murder, domestic violence, and related counts. He is held without bail pending further proceedings in Weber County. That status line is placed here because the relationship context and the charging lane are inseparable. One explains the other. From a narrator's chair, the most useful skepticism is the simplest. The facts about cohabitation and access do not decide guilt on their own. They tell us who could move freely in the home, who could know where a gun was kept, and who did not need to break a lock to be in a hallway before dawn. The scene will have to carry the rest. The next step in this story will test the robbery claim against that freedom of movement and against the evidence gathered beyond the tape. The house went quiet again after the shot. Inside the tape, the work stayed methodical. Outside it, the search began. Patrol circulated the description from the stairwell encounter, pushed it to nearby agencies, and built the first hour-by-hour track. The aim was simple: locate a teen who had been in the home at the time of the gunfire and left. The goal was not to chase a story, it was to find a person. The window was tight. Just before 3 in the morning on October 18, 2025, a single discharge and a departure down a short stairwell. Within that same day, leads pointed north into Davis County. There, officers made contact and took a teenage male into custody without incident. No second crime scene was declared. This remained the Ogden case, anchored to one bedroom and one hallway. The arrest was a downstream step, not a new setting. The inventory mattered. During the arrest, officers documented several ounces of marijuana and more than $4,000 in cash. Those items were not conclusions. They were facts that raised practical questions. Why was a teenager carrying distributable weight? Why that much currency, immediately after a fatal shooting? Detectives did what this kind of case always requires. They marked it, logged it, and set it beside the timeline to see whether it pushed the narrative or only sat there. Clean paperwork helps later because memory blurs, receipts don't. Back in Ogden, the missing household firearm remained the central unresolved point. Case notes had already identified it as the weapon used to kill 15-year-old Chanel Alvarez. At the time of the arrest, there was no recovered gun. That absence is not a hole in the story, it is a lane of inquiry. When a weapon tied to a death inside a home is removed from that home, investigators test everything that removal implies: access, motive to conceal, and the route by which it left. They do not guess. They trace. If the weapon turns up later, the record will absorb it. If it doesn't, the record will still stand. The witness statement from the stairwell, the single word robbery, didn't vanish just because someone was in custody. Detectives treated it as a claim to be compared against the rest of the file. Now there were new data points to press against it. A teen located the same day in another county, in possession of cash and drugs, after a shooting inside a bedroom where a household gun was reported taken. Those are not theatrics. They are links. Each one can be tested, challenged, or broken, but together they give the case a direction that is more than speculation. This is the part of the work the public rarely sees, the balance between urgency and restraint. Families want answers now. So do neighbors. Procedure slows that impulse because answers that come too fast are the ones most likely to come apart in court. A useful narrator's aside here is only this: facts are not louder when repeated. They only become louder when they hold up against paperwork, timestamps, and sworn statements. The team put the arrest inventory, the time of contact in Davis County, and the name from the filings into a single spine document so that nothing in this case would tilt with the next headline. There is a human dimension that belongs in this chapter even at its most procedural. The day a teenager dies, other teenagers are questioned. Friends are pulled out of routines to sit in rooms with officers and talk about habits, text threads, and nights that seemed ordinary until they weren't. It is hard to ask those questions. It is harder to answer them. Communities don't recover by guessing. They recover by knowing what happened and how, so they can see risk earlier the next time. That is why a clean record matters as much as a clean lab result. By the end of October 18th, the booking process in Davis County was underway, and Weber County prosecutors were preparing the first round of filings. The status that would become public in the days ahead, adult charges, no bail, was not a flourish. It followed directly from the relationship context already established and the seriousness of a close-range killing inside a home. But that belongs to the next phase. For this section, the action is contained: a departure, an arrest, a logged inventory, and the alignment of those points with a scene that has not changed since the moment it was secured. Investigators' line: the aim is not to make the facts exciting, it is to make them reliable. The word on the stairs was simple. Testing it was not. Detectives put the robbery claim through the same 3 screens they use in every bedroom shooting: entry, selection, and time. Entry asks how a person got in. Selection asks what was taken and why. Time asks whether the story can physically fit inside the minutes available. Entry first. The residence was already secured and documented. Investigators reviewed doors, windows, and obvious access points for damage or defeat. If a stranger forced their way in during the night, something usually shows: hardware displaced, frames scarred, screens bent. Reports from this case did not describe a house torn apart by an intruder. That doesn't prove anything by itself, but it limits what robbery can mean. A claim that someone broken has to live somewhere on the house. If it doesn't live on the wood and the locks, it has to live in the timeline, and the timeline here was measured in minutes just before 3 in the morning on October 18, 2025. Selection next. Robberies leave patterns. They take small, valuable items and often leave evidence of search: drawers disturbed, containers opened, rooms rifled in a way that is hard to fake without time and noise. In this home, the item flagged in the case notes was not jewelry or electronics. It was the household handgun, later identified in the file as the murder weapon. That single selection changes the logic. A thief who enters a stranger's bedroom at night for valuables and leaves with only the one object that explains the gunshot is uncommon. Investigators wrote what they always write when the taken item is also the weapon: determine access, determine knowledge, determine interest in concealment. Time last. The witness described a single shot, a brief encounter on the stairwell, and an exit. Patrol response followed within minutes. To turn a bedroom shooting into a robbery narrative, an intruder would need time to choose targets, move through the home, and escape without detection, all before first units arrived and without leaving a strong search signature. The short window and the clean documentation do not rule out the claim. They press it hard. Good procedure turns that pressure into a simple request: show us where the minutes went. Detectives built a small grid to compare the claim against the scene. The stairwell sighting was logged to the foot of the steps. The bedroom doorway was tied to its measurements. The household firearms' last known storage was captured in interviews. From there, the team followed two lines at once. One line asked practical questions of the room. Is there evidence that someone apart from the household came inside to look for money or valuables that night? The other line followed the missing gun, who had access to it, who knew where it was stored, and what moving that gun implies when a teenager dies by a close-range shot. They did not leap to motive. They did not write feelings into the record. They set the witness statement alongside what the house could carry. Then they added the arrest day facts, location in Davis County, the cash, the drugs, without letting those items answer questions they cannot answer alone. Cash in a pocket is context, not proof. Drugs in a bag are context, not proof. The file treats them that way so the narrative can withstand trial pressure later. For the viewer who wants clarity without jargon, this is the shape of the test. If robbery is true, there are only a few workable versions. One version is a quick, opportunistic entry by a stranger who knew there was a gun and came for that gun. That version still has to respect the time window and the lack of obvious search noise. Another version is a staged narrative offered in the first moments after a shot. That version has to honor the same constraints from the opposite direction. If you call it a robbery, the house and the minutes should support you. A narrator's job here is to keep the room and the clock in view and to remember the person at the center of both. Chanel Alvarez was 15. Investigations like this one are not about proving a point, they're about proving what happened. Families deserve certainty. Communities deserve a process that can be trusted when the case leaves the headlines and enters a courtroom. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community, and the only honest way to mend any of that is to let the facts stay heavier than the words used to frame them. By the end of this testing phase, the claim had been reduced to what it could support: no public documentation of widespread ransacking, a narrow window for any outside search, and a taken item that matched the weapon used against Chanel inside her bedroom. Investigators put a pin in that and moved forward. The next step was to expand beyond the walls, pull phones, messages, and any camera sources that could either backstop the word on the stairs or retire it. When the room stops talking, electronics start. Detectives moved from the bedroom and stairwell to the data layer, phones, messages, and any camera that could place people against a clock. The standard sequence is clean. Secure devices, log them, and seek the warrants that unlock content, texts, calls, app messages, location artifacts, and cloud backups. The goal isn't curiosity. It's to see whether the minutes before and after the shot match what was said on the stairs. Phones first. Any device found in the home or later recovered from individuals is sealed, photographed, and booked. Warrants cover subscriber info, message threads, call logs, and account access. Investigators don't guess about context in teen cases, they read it. If a device is locked, the lab handles extraction attempts under the warrant's scope. The interest is narrow: who communicated with Chanel late at night, who was in contact with the teen male before departure, and whether any message references a gun, a conflict, or a plan to meet inside the home. Nothing is announced publicly here, it's all paper and timestamps until a hearing compels disclosure. Next is movement. Robbery implies an outsider. Outsiders leave traces: car approaches, foot traffic, unusual stops. Detectives canvassed for residential cameras, doorbells, and business systems on the likely routes in and out of the neighborhood. The request is simple: a window bracketing just before 3 in the morning on October 18, 2025. Even a negative result matters. A route with no outside vehicle in the right minutes tightens the narrative. A vehicle without a plate but with a distinctive profile can still become a lead if other data points line up. Procedure makes room for both outcomes without overselling either one. Call detail records come next. With judicial approval, investigators ask carriers for logs and tower connections relevant to the early morning window. This is not TV tracking, it's range and probability. Combined with known addresses, it can confirm whether a device was plausibly near the Ogden home, and later, whether it began moving toward Davis County. If the records are thin, the case doesn't break. If they are clear, they limit the number of workable stories. Either way, the file grows in facts, not adjectives. A short, practical step sits beside all of this: message preservation requests to platforms teens actually use. They do not reveal content without legal process, but they can prevent deletion while that process moves. In cases involving minors, the clock on these requests matters almost as much as evidence on the floor. Fast preservation protects what might otherwise vanish while families are still absorbing the news. Inside the house, detectives also document digital context visible without breaching privacy: charging stations, recently used headphones, notification buzzers on a nightstand. Those items don't speak by themselves, but they help a jury understand why it's reasonable to expect digital noise around a midnight to 3 a.m. window in 2025. If the record is quiet, that quiet becomes a finding. If it's active, the pattern becomes a map. All of this returns to the word on the stairs. If a robbery brought an unknown intruder, the electronic picture should feel busy and strange: unfamiliar phones passing by, a car in the window no one recognizes, contact patterns that don't match the household's routine. If this was not a robbery, the picture should feel closer: communications between known parties, movement that starts and ends in familiar places, and silence where a stranger would have made noise. The data doesn't deliver a motive. It delivers alignment, or the lack of it. A human note belongs here, brief and clear. Teen cases run through phones because teens live there. That's not a moral judgment, it's logistics. Families watching this may not like that reality, but it's what keeps witnesses from carrying the entire weight of a case. When the truth depends on minutes, electronics make those minutes visible without forcing grief to do all the talking. By the end of this phase, investigators had widened the frame beyond walls and carpet. Devices were logged, warrants were moving, canvases were underway, and carrier requests were in play, all tied to the narrow window around the shot and the immediate hours that followed. The physical scene stood intact. Now the file had a parallel track designed to test the story with signals and timestamps, not opinions. By the time the lab requests and camera canvas were moving, the case took its first public turn. Weber County prosecutors filed in district court, not juvenile, and they did it with the weight Utah law reserves for killings inside domestic relationships. The filing lists first-degree murder with a domestic violence designation, obstruction of justice, theft of a firearm, possession of a dangerous weapon by a minor, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The language is formal because it has to be. It names the act, the relationship context, and the conduct that followed. Filing as an adult for a 16-year-old is not a headline choice, it's statutory lane selection in a homicide. The designation signals two things to the public that matter here. First, the relationship evidence, cohabitation in the months leading up to October 18, 2025, qualifies the homicide as domestic violence under Utah's framework. Second, adult court locks the proceedings to rules that are designed for the most serious crimes: fuller discovery, open hearings, and penalties measured in decades, not programs. None of that decides guilt. It defines the room where guilt or innocence will be tested. The custody decision followed quickly, held without bail. Detention orders in a case like this are built on clear factors: danger to the community, risk of flight, and the likelihood of obstructing justice if released. The investigation had already documented a missing household firearm identified as the murder weapon, an immediate departure from the scene, and an arrest the same day in Davis County with cash and drugs logged. Prosecutors pointed to those facts not as motive but as risk indicators. Judges read the record, not the mood in the hallway, and on this record the order was to hold. Two standards govern the next steps, and they are often misunderstood. Probable cause is what gets you charged, enough facts to believe a crime was committed and the named person committed it. Beyond a reasonable doubt is what gets you convicted, proof that persuades a jury after the defense has had its full hearing. The police reports and affidavits that carried this case from the bedroom to the courthouse satisfy the first standard. The second standard lives months away in motions, witness chairs, and exhibits. Keeping them separate is how cases survive cross-examination. From a process view, the calendar now fills with predictable landmarks. An initial appearance and a detention review are followed by formal arraignment in the 2nd District Court. Discovery begins. The state must turn over the reports, logs, and downloads it will rely on. The defense will scrutinize every timestamp and request what it needs to test them. Motions may challenge searches, warrants, or statements. None of that is drama. It is the grind that decides what a jury will see and what it won't. The tighter the file, the cleaner those fights become. A brief, necessary human line belongs here. Families measure time differently from courts. For them, the clock stopped just before 3 in the morning on October 18th. For the system, that instant is the start of a timeline that must hold up a year from now if a jury is to trust it. The adult court filing and the no bail order are not closure. They are scaffolding to keep the case intact while it moves forward. Nothing about the single scene discipline changes. The offense remains anchored to a bedroom in Ogden, Utah. The stairwell statement is still a claim under test. The arrest in Davis County remains a procedural step, not a second crime scene. What has changed is the forum. The questions that began on a hallway will be asked again at counsel table, with rules, under oath. The case is ready for that phase because the record was built for it. This case closes its investigative arc without theatrics, one scene, one timeline, one file sturdy enough for court. The crime is anchored to a single Ogden bedroom just before 3 in the morning on October 18, 2025. A witness reports a teen on the stairs saying robbery, then leaving. Forensics document a close-range gunshot. The household firearm is reported taken and identified in the record as the weapon. Hours later, officers arrest a teenage male in Davis County. Cash and marijuana are logged. Nothing more dramatic is needed, and nothing else is added. The scene never moves. The story doesn't split. From there, the work is reconciliation, not rhetoric. Dispatch times match body-worn timestamps, evidence logs match photographs, statements are measured against fixed points. If a time or line wobbles, it is corrected on paper, not argued into place. That discipline is why the file can be read aloud to a jury a year from now and sound the same as it did the week of the shooting. It is also why the robbery word remains a claim under test rather than a headline. Procedure holds the facts still long enough for law to do the talking. The legal posture is clear and current. Weber County has filed adult charges against Hezekiah Plummer, 16, including first-degree murder with a domestic violence designation, obstruction of justice, theft of a firearm, possession of a dangerous weapon by a minor, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The court has ordered no bail. As of October 26, 2025, the case is pending in 2nd District Court. Probable cause brought it to the door. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt will decide what happens next. That decision belongs to the courtroom. The last word here is reserved for Chanel Alvarez, 15, whose name appears on every page that matters. Teen relationships can blur boundaries and accelerate risk. That's not a moral lesson, it's a practical one. Parents, schools, and friends can lower that risk by watching access, naming pressure early, and insisting on help before a crisis becomes a clock. Prevention is the only part of this story any community controls. We end where the real record ends today. One home in Ogden, Utah, one victim, one defendant charged as an adult, one custody order holding without bail, and one case moving toward trial. The file is built to be tested. The testing will happen under oath, not here. As I close this case, here's what I carry forward. Safety in teen relationships lives in boundaries, check-ins, and the courage to speak up early. Evidence matters, but so do the small conversations that keep harm from taking root. If this story moved you, tell someone you trust today and ask one person how they're really doing. What safeguard would you make standard at home or school? Where are you watching from? If this resonated, please subscribe to the channel and comment with your city or state, or tell me why it didn't land. Your feedback shapes the next story.